In today's world, masculinity is more controversial than ever. On one side, there are people who have created careers off of creating content to promote masculinity.
On the other hand, there's a war on toxic masculinity.
In one click, you can find thousands of tutorials and motivational content to harness your masculinity.
But if we stop for a second, and we take a break from the sea of fast-paced content, can we confirm what masculinity even is? Is there one universal definition of masculinity that we can all agree on?
Is masculinity how strong you are, your physique, your position in the male hierarchy, or perhaps your relationship with women? Today, we're going to take a far look back into the history of masculinity to see where it came from and how it evolved into the controversial culture that we have today.
First, we should take a look at the widely accepted origin of masculinity, 7th century BCE ancient Rome. Masculinity was a topic discussed heavily by Stoics and philosophers, and although there were some disputes, common themes were leadership and governments in war, sex, and politics. To conquer new lands and to win wars, ancient Rome needed strong men who were willing to dominate and conquer, and that's probably why masculinity in ancient Rome at its birth was focused on these two concepts. In fact, among almost all of the ancient empires, there's a close link between masculinity and the wider agendas of the society. After the Romans, the ancient Greeks, Chinese, and Indian all possibly used masculinity to shape how their populations would act. As opposed to ancient Rome, in ancient Greece, masculinity was focused on meritocracy and excellence, meaning a man's ability to develop skills, innovate, and create. A Greek playwright, Sophocles, said, "A man, though wise, should never be ashamed of learning more, and must unbend his mind." And this definition of masculinity worked very well in a society like ancient Greek, which focused on revolutionizing art, science, and philosophy. And though where the Greeks favored meritocracy, 5th century BCE ancient India had a caste system that simultaneously favored social harmony within the order and success in war with foreign powers. In the 3rd century BCE, Buddha is credited to have said, "A man may conquer 1,000,000 men in battle, but one who conquers himself is indeed the greatest of conquerors." The Bhagavad Gita, a 5th century poem about ancient India, said, "A real man is one who, though strong, is also humble, and whose courage is tempered by wisdom." Therefore, the ancient Indian definition of masculinity was not like the ancient Greek. It was not a man who strove for personal excellence. Instead, it was a man who understood the varna credited to him at birth and seeked social harmony within the order and wanted to fight, possibly to his death, as one unit in an army of thousands. If you go further east to ancient China, war and conquest are not glorified at all in the definition of masculinity. Instead, they relied on the social codes produced through Confucianism, which namely are harmony, righteousness, wisdom, honesty, and loyalty, among others. Confucius himself said, "The gentleman understands what is moral. The small man understands what is profitable."
As we've seen, even at the birth of masculinity across Western and Eastern civilizations, the definition of masculinity was not unanimous. This means that the glorified ideal man in ancient Rome would likely be shunned and exiled in ancient China. Most of the time, each culture's definition of masculinity reflected the exact ambitions of the leaders of the civilization. It makes you wonder, how much of your definition of masculinity is exactly what the elites of your society want you to think? Now, let's dive into the early Common Era,
where the idea of masculinity gains even more complexity through the addition of another element, God. In the early Common Era, through the spread of religion, so came the idea that good men were close to their God. Islamic prophet Muhammad was reported by Abu Huraira to have said, "The nobility of a man is in his religion, his manhood is in his intellect, and his honor is in his character." Paul the Apostle, one of the 12 apostles in Christianity, ordered men to be alert, stand firm in the faith, act like a man, be strong. O man of God, flee evil, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness. Framing masculinity as being close to God is a significant change and is still heavily prevalent in the idea of masculinity today, even in people that are not heavily religious. These definitions of masculinity tie the value of the man themselves to their commitment to the religion.
And it was during the 1st to 6th century CE where a villain against the ideals of masculinity was identified: foolishness.
Marcus Aurelius from Rome said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And Bushido Samurai Code, a rulebook containing 7 codes for samurai, stated that a warrior is never a fool. He listens more than he speaks. The origin of the idea of combating foolishness within masculinity could be a result of greater education and writing levels within societies. And it could be due to the creation of important roles, such as artists, explorers, or writers, which are jobs not traditionally associated with raw strength or conquest.
And now we make a big leap forward to the 1800s, where the traditional narrative of masculinity was completely flipped in a way almost unimaginable to the people at the time. The 1800s was the age of globalization, interconnectedness, and doubt in the traditional narrative of masculinity. The Industrial Revolution in the West meant better enforced property rights, greater education levels, and greater wealth, which meant many of the worries of the traditional man were solved by the state. And as trade and communication became more globalized, it became increasingly more obvious that a man's role in society differed greatly across different cultures. And so, what they defined as masculinity might not be the correct definition. And as a combination of these factors, perhaps the most controversial element of masculinity was created: a man's connections to his own emotions. Van Gogh said in 1876 that the heart of a man is very much like the sea. It has its storms, it has its tides, and in its depths, it has its pearls too. An English poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, said, "Genius is the power of carrying the feelings of manhood into the powers of manhood."
Furthermore, it was during the early 1800s where the traditional lines separating men and women were blurred. The Enlightenment period, which was a philosophical movement emphasizing reason, individualism, and skepticism of traditional authority, meant that religion was no longer the leading authority in many societies. Instead, science was the new ruler. And this meant that women started to work jobs that were traditionally reserved for men. And this threatened the essence of masculinity. If women could work all the jobs that were thought only men could do, then it begged the question if masculinity was only a right for men, or if the difference between masculinity and femininity was a useful distinction. As a result of the instability caused by the Enlightenment period, a new form of masculinity rose, which aimed to restore order and re-clarify the distinction between the roles of men and women in society, and often put dominance of men over women. In the early 1800s, a widely popular English theologist said, "Stand true to your calling to be a man. Real women will always be relieved and grateful when men are willing to be men." In 1880, American theologist James Freeman Clarke said, "Manliness means perfect manhood, as womanliness implies perfect womanhood. Manliness is the character of a man as he ought to be, as he was meant to be." and where cracks in the dome of masculinity were successfully sealed by reinforcement of the traditional roles of men and women in the 1800s. In the 1900s, the entire dome shattered as the rights of women in the West were completely revolutionized. Between 1900 and 1950, 50 different countries gave women voting rights, and this included almost all of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And so, in the 1900s, women gained the ability to make important decisions on the ruling of their countries. However, through the two world wars, many governments asked women to join the workforce in important industries like transportation and in factories. After the war was over, many of the women stayed in these industries, and the perception of what women were capable of doing was changed forever. In the 1900s, women also gained access to contraception, which means they could delay childbirth and focus on their careers in their youth. Throughout the 1900s, the number of kids per person dropped massively. And in the 1900s, it was also the time where women leaders began leading countries all across the globe, with Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Indira Gandhi in India. When women can learn to do everything masculine men were at once thought only to be able to do, the traditional narrative separating masculine and feminine almost shatters. The 1900s were therefore a largely turbulent time, where religious masculinity and war masculinity had resurgences. It was also during this time that masculinity was capitalized by marketers and salesmen to get men to buy products that they thought that they needed. And now we emerge to the current century with a technological revolution. TikTok, AI, social media. Life is great for a person like me. However, it is not great if your goal is to reinforce traditional gender stereotypes. Through the explosion of easily accessed entertainment, the feminist movement, and increasing awareness of men's mental health, a new wave of conscious masculinity has been born. One of my favorite speakers, and a real pioneer in the new wave of masculinity, is Stormzy. He's a black British rapper from the UK, and although working in an industry that glorifies guns, violence, theft, he's completely open about his own struggles with mental health, and he's an advocate for young men being able to spread their feelings and be vulnerable. In an interview with Vogue, Stormzy said, "Back when I was younger, my idea of masculinity was always rooted in violence. Whoever could fight, whoever was more willing to go the extra mile to protect their name. But what we learned about being men, about having all the girls and all the money and the violence, didn't turn out to be real manhood for me. It was somewhat the opposite. I found confidence and strength in my vulnerability." In Asia, a more distinct form of masculinity has been formed: soft masculinity. Soft masculinity had its rise in K-pop through the success of more feminine stars, especially in the east of Asia. Lee Jung-hyun, a South Korean actor, said, "In Korea, there's a new generation of men who want to show their feelings and embrace a new kind of masculinity, one where sensitivity and gentleness are seen as strength." This new wave of masculinity has largely been in response to the shocking amount of male sleep in countries like South Korea and Japan. And I do believe that this largely has to do with a lot of men's inability to be vulnerable, to share their emotions. This pressure to stay silent, act tough, and don't cry in front of others, I do believe that this is completely detrimental to mental health in the long run.
However, the movement towards promoting more feminine and emotional qualities among men has almost been met with an anti-movement of hard masculinity. The qualities of hard masculinity are not necessarily discouraging men opening up about their feelings, but it can occur as a byproduct. Hard masculinity suggests that men have striven too far off the traditional path, and for this reason they are lost. Some people in the manosphere suggest that because men in the current age have no world war, no Great Depression, and no global cause to sacrifice themselves for, they have become soft and lack purpose. This is summed up by the quote, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. First said by Michael Hoff, but repeated time and time again by other creators. Another element of hard masculinity is the idea that modern comforts are weakening men, and there is a vital need for toughness, grit, and self-inflicted struggle. Andrew Tate, perhaps the most viral and recognizable face of the controversial manosphere, has said, "The masculine perspective is you have to understand that life is war. It's a war for the female you want. It's a war for the car you want. It's a war for the money you want. It's a war for status. Masculine life is war."
Hard masculinity has been criticized a lot for promoting toxic masculinity. And that's also another word that has been thrown around a lot and has a lot of ambiguity. What is toxic masculinity? And how much of masculinity becomes toxic?
Well, if you ask me, masculinity should mean very little for individuals like you and I. That is because masculinity is a social construct that has been used over time to influence men into acting in ways that benefit the elite class, often to little benefit of our own. So, simply put, masculinity are rules for living made by men for men, and toxic masculinity is when these rules restrict freedom so badly that they utterly destroy the mental health of men. We have seen, since its birth in ancient Rome to its promotion by Andrew Tate in the modern age, masculinity has changed radically over time. We have also seen that the definition of masculinity often corresponds perfectly with the wider agendas of the society in which it belongs. We have seen how men have sacrificed their lives, the lives of others, their emotional well-being, and their ability to bond and raise families, all in the name of masculinity. And so, to answer the bigger question of this video, I don't actually believe there's one true definition of masculinity, because I believe in essence, masculinity is not based on any objective science, not even genetics. To prove this, let's take a look at the top 3 most desirable qualities of masculine men. I personally would say they are leadership, bravery, and strength. I don't think that these 3 qualities are only things that should be promoted in masculine men and not feminine women. For example, if we take leadership, 1, I don't think there's a single strand of DNA in the Y chromosome that makes men naturally better leaders. I think this is more of a societal construct, and in many societies, it's harder for women to get into positions of leadership than it is for men. But either way, isn't it better if as society we try to promote people to become stronger, better leaders, no matter what gender they are? But let's say that is an anomaly. Then let's take a look at bravery. Men, under the terms of masculinity, are expected to be brave, to fight for their country and to fight for their family. But if we take a look at women too, particularly mothers have described themselves as becoming overwhelmed with this feeling of fearlessness when it comes to protecting their own children. So both genders have shown this extreme capability to prove their bravery. And this again shouldn't be a quality only promoted in men. It's good for all human beings in general to be brave. And finally, if we take a look at strength, this is something that men have somewhat of an objective advantage in. Men are on average stronger than women. However, this is due to a higher average weight and higher average height than women. If you take a look at the power generated per kilogram of muscle mass of female muscle and male muscle, there's absolutely no difference. And either way, isn't it better for all human beings to gain strength, to work out, to exercise, because this improves mobility, health, well-being? Of all these three qualities, I do not see how they should only be promoted in men and not women.
Now, if we can agree that every desirable quality that masculinity promotes in men is equally as desirable in women, why should the distinction between masculinity and femininity be made at all?
Perhaps there is no difference between the two, and instead we should just focus on being good, strong, kind people instead of separating men and women based off standards created by society. Why can't society be built to encourage both men and women equally to be smarter, stronger, and more emotionally vulnerable? Why can't we just forget all this noise of masculine this, feminine that, and instead just focus on everyone being better human beings, no matter the gender? Cheers.
Yo, thank you so much for making it this far into the video. It makes me very happy that you enjoyed it this far. And as for this face mask, I don't know what actually went wrong. I followed all the instructions, but it looks so gnarly when I'm looking back at the footage. But either way, if you liked the video, please go ahead, hit that like button, you know what I'm saying? If you like the video super much, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. And this is a final message from your CEO of Rank Club to say thank you, and that I'm gonna be coming back with even more better videos. Let's go. Face reveal!